Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, I am Dr. Shabnam Mehlawat, an Associate Professor from the Faculty of Law, University of Delhi. This is my lecture number 8, whereby I will be telling you about the domestic laws of our country. Earlier, I had explained about the international laws, sustainable development, and how these international laws, by way of our constitution, have been given a valid standing within the laws of our country. So now, if any of the environmental problems come in, we have drafted laws which deals with each particular problem according to the law which has been enacted. Today, I will be talking about the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. This was the first law after the Forests Laws which the British had drafted with respect to environment, and this law was brought about under the state list. I had also previously talked about 3 kinds of lists being there. One is the union list, one is the state list, and one is the concurrent list. So where the area which falls under the state list exists, water is said to be one of those commodities which comes under the state list. So this law is also applicable to those states who have accepted it as a part of its legislation. So today I will be talking about the water pollution, the law first, the problems which have arisen under the law, how the law states we need to tackle these problems, and how these problems have actually been dealt with, and then the final decision in case a case is made out to the court where violated rights or where a person feels depressed or a person feels aggravated by a decision taken by a board, he can approach the courts to get a redressal by way of monetary compensation. So moving on to the act is, firstly, water is an indispensable and essential natural resource. It is an endowment of the nature, and as such, access to water is a natural right, being a part of right to life. This was also stated in the case of Susestha versus State of Tamil Nadu, which I have already previously talked about. The Supreme Court had stated that water bodies are required to be retained. Such requirement is envisaged not only because of the right to water, but also of the quality of right to life as envisaged under Article 21 of the Constitution. The same has been recognized by our fundamental duties or directive principles of the state policy, which are sections 47, 48A and 51AG of the Constitution, where it is our duty of every individual to protect the natural resources, whereby also pointing out that it is the duty of the state to see that the resources are being protected. This also gets covered under the public trust doctrine, which I have previously talked in my previous series. That is, the state is a trustee of our resources, and it is the state's duty to see that these resources are protected while being made use of. It should not be given to any single person, even for a fair cash equivalent, and they should be restricted for particular uses only. So everyone must have access to clean and pure drinking water and pollution-free water bodies like rivers, lakes, ponds in the villages, streams, seas, tidal waters, etc. Contamination of these water bodies not only threatens aquatic life, but also poses serious health hazards to human beings who tend to consume it. The Water Act, or as it is stated as the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, it is a comprehensive legislation that regulates agencies responsible for checking on water pollution and the ambit of pollution control boards both at the central and the state levels. The Water Act was adopted by the Indian Parliament under Article 253 to prevent and control water pollution in India. It was later amended in 1988. This was brought into force in 1974, and in 1977 it sought to provide for levy and collection of a cess on water consumed by the persons operating and carrying on certain type of industrial activities. The cess is collected to augment the resources of the central board and the state boards for prevention of water polluting actions, which are constituted and recognized under the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974. The objectives of the Act. Now, this Act is also in consonance with the Stockholm Declaration and its principles, which seeks to protect environment, and that restoration of environment should be carried out wherever degradation takes place. So, adhering to those principles and recognizing those principles as a part of our domestic laws, they have drafted the water law to include within it by the principles of Stockholm Declaration and the concept of sustainable development before setting out the objectives of the Act. This Act falls under the state list, so states have made provisions for various activities to be curbed, and if water bodies or any of the water resources are being polluted by any of the industrial activities, any private activities, or even governmental activities, these will be asked to be stopped till treatment of that untreated waste is not done. They will not be allowed to pollute the natural resources. So the objective of the Act is to provide for prevention, control and abatement of water pollution, for maintenance or restoration of the wholesomeness of water, for the establishment of pollution control water boards, and to assess pollution levels and punish the polluters. The important definitions under the law are, first and foremost, it defines what pollution is, or in terms, what is water pollution when it is created. Section 2E of the Act defines pollution as a means of any contamination of water or alteration of the physical, chemical or biological properties of water, or disposing of any sewage waste into water which is likely to pollute it, which is likely to create a nuisance, and that the untreated disposal of that waste into the water is harmful to public health or safety, or to the domestic, industrial or other legitimate uses, or harmful to the life and health of the animals and aquatic plants. So this definition of water pollution clearly states that if an industrial activity is disposing of its untreated waste into the natural streams or into the natural resources like rivers, ponds, rivulets, streams, or even the wells, or even dumping it into the underground water, they will be made responsible, firstly, through the due procedure established by the law. The board will take cognizance of their activity, collect samples, analyze those samples, and after reports have been prepared, they will ask the industrialist not only to repair what damage he has done, but also to help him to restore the wholesomeness or the purity of water as it is stated in layman terms. So it clearly says pollution is created when a person or an industrial activity dumps its waste into these natural resources, and pollution is created, thereby causing harm, where people cannot simply pick that water and drink it. And if they are even in the vicinity of such areas which is polluted water, they might contract death, disease or disaster, which within a place might spread, again reminding us of the COVID times. So section 2B of the Act says there has to be a central board, which means the Central Pollution Control Board, which shall look into the overall polluting activities as well as take certain decisions and function and perform functions for the overall benefit of environment and mankind. The state pollution control boards in a similar manner are to be created for dealing with state problems or any regional or any specific problem which may arise to a water body because of any other or an industrialist activity or any other activity where it is likely to cause pollution within an area. So these boards are established to look into the individual cases where water is being polluted or where water pollution is being created into the natural resources or natural water resources. The water does not need to be brought in artificially. It has to be present in a natural manner where then the central board or the state board under whose jurisdiction the case may lie, they may examine the problem, pick samples and ask the industrialist or the activity either to have treatment before they dispose of their waste or stopping of that activity altogether if it continues to create pollution. Along with that, they will also be punished and fined for those polluting activities which have created pollution in the natural resource or the environment. The now comes what are those contaminating residue objects which are disposed of untreated. These are sewage effluents and trade effluents. Sewage effluent means effluent from any sewerage system or sewage disposal works and includes sullage from open drains. Section 2K talks about trade effluents, which includes any liquid, gaseous or solid substance which may be discharged from any premises used for carrying on any industry operation, process, treatment and disposal system other than the domestic sewage. The streams or the natural water resources, one of those resources which has been described is a stream, which includes river, watercourse, whether flowing or for the time being dry, inland water, whether natural or artificial, subterranean waters, sea or tidal waters to such extent or as the state government by notification in the official gazette specify on this behalf. So whatever is a natural resource of water, it may not be running, it may be standing, or it may not be present in a particular area where it might be referred to as a stream, where it also may include within its fold water which might be coming in from the sea or being let out into the sea where tidal waves occur or where tides rise and fall back and there are receding waters. Any kind of natural water resource system is present. So the definition of pollution would apply to that if the sewage is disposed of into that water body or it is disposed of into a stream. These definitions are very important to understand the law related to Water Act or for the prevention and control of pollution under the Act. Because the law has made adequate provisions for agencies to be set up, for a law to be regulated and to be channelized in a manner where it seeks to protect the environment and punish the defaulter or the offender. Moving on to the Central Pollution Control Boards, let us see what is their constitution and composition which has been provided under Section 3 of the Act. The central government, through a notice in the official gazette, has the power to assign or set up a Central Pollution Control Board, also some at times in brief referred to as the Central Board. Now as far as the composition of this board is concerned, the Central Board is comprised of several members. Firstly, it needs to have a chairman which is appointed by the government and who has knowledge or practical experience in dealing with cases related to environmental protection. The chairman is appointed by the central government only, not more than 5 officials to be nominated by the central government to represent the central government, not more than 5 members to be nominated by the central government from the members of the state boards. We are talking about the constitution of the Central Pollution Control Board. Moving on to the other members, there should be at least 3 members which need to be nominated by the central government to represent the interest of agriculture, fisheries, trade, or any other interest as the government may seem fit. It also needs two persons to have representatives from the companies or corporations owned or controlled by the central government. And then for conducting all these activities, there must be a full-time secretary, member secretary, having complete knowledge, experience, and qualifications of scientific management and prevention of water pollution or environmental pollution. Moving on to, which is a very important part of the board when it is set up at the central level, when it is set up at the state levels. Most of the functions are similar to each other, except that the nominations which come at the Central Pollution Control Board, they are done by the central government, and those who are nominated to the state pollution control boards come by way of the state governments. These, besides performing the functions of the state boards in case polluting activity takes place, they also aid and advise the central government on matters concerning prevention and control of water pollution. They coordinate the activities of the state boards and resolve disputes amongst the different boards. It provides technical assistance and guidance to the state boards. They carry out and sponsor investigations and research relating to problems of water pollution and prevention, control or abatement of water pollution. They plan and organize the training of persons who might be engaged or may be sought to be engaged in preventing, controlling, and abatement of water pollution on such terms and conditions as the central boards may specify. It also organizes through mass media a comprehensive program through the prevention and control of water pollution. The constitution and composition of the state boards is provided under Section 4, where it also sees a similar setup as that of the Central Pollution Control Board, except that this is the state which has accepted this as a part of its legislation, will be appointing a similar number of members onto its state pollution control boards. So through an official notice in the Gazette, it has the power to assign or set up a state board, which is known as the State Pollution Control Board. The composition of the state board members will be a chairman who either has knowledge or some experience in dealing with cases of environmental pollution, 5 members to be nominated by the state government to represent the government, 5 members to be nominated by the central government from those functioning within the local authorities within the state, not more than 3 members nominated by the state government to represent the interest of fisheries, agriculture, trade, or any other interest which the government may deem fit. 2 others also are to be nominated from companies as representatives from those companies and corporations which are either controlled, owned, or managed by the state. Again, a full-time member secretary needs to be appointed who has certain knowledge, qualifications, and experience to deal with matters related to environmental pollution, and also helps in conducting various pollution control board dealings or the working of the pollution control board. So the functions of the state board are, besides dealing with polluting acts, it can plan a comprehensive program for preventing and controlling the pollution of the wells and the streams in the state and secure its execution. It can aid and advise the state government on matters relating to prevention and controlling of water pollution. It can collaborate with the central board to train persons employed or to be employed in preventing, controlling, or abatement of water pollution. It may lay down and modify the effluent standards of sewage and trade effluents and for the quality of receiving water resulting from the discharge of this effluents and to classify waters of the state. It may evolve methods of utilizing sewage and suitable trade effluents in agriculture. So the important aspects of the state board is not only to deal with matters but also to find ways where untreated sewage or trade effluent may be reused, recycled, and be brought out in a better manner as a finished end product and not cause pollution in the natural water resources which it might otherwise create if it is let to float or if it is dumped into the natural streams. The state government also has the authority to set up laboratories to enable the boards to perform its functions efficiently, including the collecting of samples from any stream or sewage or trade effluents which might be existing within the stream and where it can point towards the place or the persons where it is being let off untreated into that natural resource. Where it is mandatory or where it becomes a necessity to dispose of certain sewage or trade effluents into the natural resources, any industry or any activity which is likely to dispose it into the natural resource seeks to take the permission from the state board to dispose it off in the natural stream, provided it does not contain harmful substances or it does not contain sewage and trade effluents likely to cause harm not only to the aquatic life in the natural streams but also to human beings and the environment in and around these areas wherever pollution might be created. So Section 25 of the Act states that prior consent of the state board is necessary to set up any industry, a plant, or a process which is likely to discharge sewage or trade effluent into a stream, well, or sewer, or on any land, or to bring into its use any new or altered outlets for the discharge of these sewages and to begin any new discharge of sewage. So this section further states that every board is liable to maintain a register containing particulars or conditions imposed under the section related to any outlet or to any effluent from any land or premises which might be open to inspection by the state board. If a person starts a new operation without the prior approval of the board may impose any conditions as it may think fit for not obtaining its approval. It may also place a permanent injunction if it feels that a certain activity is likely to be hazardous or dangerous and cause a calamity or a disaster because of those activities. This was also seen in the case of setting in the Andhra Pradesh Pollution Control Board versus MV Naidu, where they had sought to set up a very dangerous vegetable oil plant with next to the two lakes which provide drinking water to the twin cities of Hyderabad and Secunderabad, because if that activity is likely to create pollution, then the drinking water, which is the main supply line through these lakes, would be polluted and it would cause a disaster happening on the people, for their health and hygiene may be affected. So if a person starts a new operation without the prior approval of the board, the board may also impose conditions as it may think fit for not obtaining its approval. Section 27 of the Act gives powers to the board not to grant permission for setting up an industry or continuation of an existing operation. If the company has been granted permission with some conditions attached, the state board has the power to review those conditions which it attached before giving a notice of approval to start such activity. In certain cases where certain industrial units are already running their unit and it creates a hazard by disposing of or leaking of that untreated waste or trade effluent or sewage effluent into a natural resource or outside, it has the power, the state board has the power to take emergency measures. The Water Act enunciates the power to take emergency measures in cases of pollution of stream or well by the state board. The state board may issue orders for the removal of the matter which may cause pollution, or may be ready to mitigate such pollution where it has already been created. or issue prohibition orders to the concerned persons from discharging any poisonous or noxious or polluting matter. Then another proposal which comes in under the law is that after setting up of the Central Pollution Control Board and having certain members to conduct its activities with functions attached according to the position to which they are sitting, similar replication happens under the state boards also, where they are appointed in a similar manner and are equipped with powers to deal with polluting matters into their respective areas. The government may also set up joint boards for common territories like union territories, or it may set up joint boards where two states are having a certain problem and none of the state is able to decide the problem in a neutral or an unarbitrary manner. So the joint boards may be set up under Section 13, which says an agreement may be entered by two states, one state with another state, or for the union territories which might be there. Similarly, the central government and the government of other union territories can also agree on constituting a state board. The composition of the joint board is, again, a chairman who has knowledge with respect to water pollution or environmental pollution matters, two members from each state which are nominated by their respective states to represent the state, one person to be nominated by each participating state from the members of their local authorities, and a one non-official by each state to represent the interests of agriculture, fisheries, trade, or any other interest of the participating states. Two members from the companies also need to be appointed, or corporations, which may be nominated by the central government, which is owned, controlled, or managed by the participating state. A full-time member secretary who has the required skills, experience, and qualifications in science, engineering, or management aspects of controlling and preventing pollution to be appointed by the central boards. The members who are appointed to these boards may also be disqualified under Section 6 if certain conditions exist and they do not adhere to these conditions. One of the first conditions is where a person is judged insolvent or has not paid his debts or has compounded with his creditors cannot become a member of the board. A person who is of an unsound mind or has been convicted of such offences according to the central government or the state government which involve moral turpitude. If a person is holding any office of profit or is a salaried employee of any company or a firm which is connected with the board with respect to a situation, also cannot be a member of any other board. If a member has misused his powers by virtue of being a member or holding any position in connection with the board, then the central government, or for that matter, the state government, may disqualify that member in the general interest of the public. The penalties for where environmental or water polluting problems have arisen, and they have been clearly defined as to who created that problem, and it has been already been established that they are the persons who are responsible for creation of this pollution by way of evidence, by way of samples which might have been picked up. Penalties are imposed on these persons, where in the penalty they not only need to pay for the harm which has been caused, but also in other mannerisms. If a person fails to comply with the order of the board under subsection 2 and 3 of section 20, then cases of conviction he is punishable with the imprisonment for a period of 3 months or fine or both. If a person fails to comply with orders of the board under clause E of subsection 1 of section 32 or subsection 2 of section 33, then in that case the person would be imprisoned for a period of 6 years, which may extend to 6 months, which may extend to 6 years, or with fine or both. Apart from the above mentioned penalties, section 42 mentions penalties of different kinds of acts, namely, if any person removes, destroys, or pulls down any notice put up by the board, if someone obstructs the member of the board or any other person who is acting under the board, if a person fails to produce any information as required by the members of the board for the performance of their duties, or if a person gives information to the members which is known to be false, then for all these above actions, he may be convicted and may be imprisoned for a period of 3 months or fined, or which may extend to 10,000 rupees, or may be subject to both the conditions simultaneously. We see that the penalties which are there when the law was enacted in 1974 was according to the times when the law was enacted. A drawback of this law can be seen that the amount of money which was drafted in probably prior to 1974 has not been increased even in the current date. So that is one of the lacunas where people who create problems are able to get away by paying fines or by having a simple punishment imposed upon them for the polluting or the degrading activity which has taken place due to their actions. As we also see in the case of Indian Council for Enviro-Legal Action, where the company dumped its hazardous and toxic chemicals into the underground water, and the whole underground water was contaminated and the people had to travel miles to get drinking water. The case could not be tried and be over with until the 20th century. So the delays in the courts in bringing about punishment for such kind of persons does not act as a deterrent, but as a promoter, that in the end the person will only pay fine and get away with the polluting activity which he has created. Some of the important cases under the Water Act are those of MC Mehta versus Union of India, or the Ganga pollution case. The Supreme Court of India brought on record the utter indifference of Kanpur tanneries and ordered the immediate stoppage of discharge of effluents into the river Ganga by analyzing the whole situation, that it was the tanneries who were mainly responsible for creation of this waste, since they were disposing of their untreated waste directly into the river Ganges. Their municipalities stated that they did not have enough funds to navigate or channel these activities, and some of the industries came up with the proposition that they did not have enough money to set up treatment plants within their facility so as to treat the untreated waste and then dispose of into the river, to which the court stated that it is not Article 19, which is right to occupation, but it is right to life that shall override these activities, even if people are working and their livelihoods depends on these industries. So strict orders were given to the tanneries, firstly to set up primary treatment plants, and later on they were asked to set up secondary treatment plants before they could actually dispose of their untreated waste or sewage effluent directly into the river Ganges. The state boards were instructed to monitor this enforcement, and they also held that under Article 51A, it is the duty of the central government to prevent pollution and improve the environment. Moving on to the next case is UP Pollution Control Board versus Modi Distilleries. Now, this is a case of 1987 where a company, which was an industry, was discharging of its noxious trade effluents without the consent of the board. The company was not made a party to the proceeding. In an application under Section 482 of the CRPC, the High Court held that the lapses were detrimental to the validity of the process initiated against the MD of the company. However, the Supreme Court held that these technical flaws could be corrected by an amendment, and it held that due to inaction of the state boards, many businesses had escaped punishment despite their breaching the law, which is of the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act. Moving on to the next case is the UP Pollution Control Board versus Mohan Meekings. The applicant board had launched prosecution on Mohan Meekings and its directors for continuously polluting the river, and there was a long delay in the legal proceedings as the case shuttled between the Sessions Court, the Magistrate Court, which is the lower courts, and the High Court. The Supreme Court of India observed that such delays would also cause harm to the environmental protection, and such cases need to be expedited. At that point of time, there was an absence of a special court which would exclusively deal with the cases to try such cases in a swift and expeditious manner. The respondents tried to stall the case by citing inordinate delay on their part, and the Supreme Court held that the very fact of delay was more than sufficient for expediting these proceedings of the case. It stated that courts should not deal with matters of grave importance in a very routine manner. It should take them up on priority basis, try them, and give relief immediately so that deterioration and degradation of the natural resources does not take place. So now, starting with the important cases which have been covered under the Water Pollution Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, specifically dealt with giving out landmark judgments for the protection of not only the wholesomeness and the clarity and the purity of water, but also restoring our natural resources so that the present generation also benefits from it, and we protect and preserve the same for our future generations. So the case of, as we have already and previously dealt with, was the case of MC Mehta versus Union of India under the Kanpur Tanneries case. It was firstly, a layout was laid down that the problems were related to this pollution which has been created. 80% of it was done by the tanneries operating in Kanpur. The other was the household untreated waste, the waste given out by the agriculturists and by the cattle which were allowed to move freely within the area. So these identification of the industries in being the source responsible for creation of that pollution, they were given directions to abide by the direction of the court in a regulated and in a specific manner. They were first asked to set up primary treatment plants so that they do not dispose of their waste into the general streams or drains, which ultimately fall into the river Ganges. And then after a brief period of time when they are established, they should also establish the second treatment plants which absolves the water from all impurities, and before they let out that sewage or the other waste which might be there into the river. So this order by the Supreme Court in this case was a landmark judgment, and it went on to promote many other litigations with respect to environment and specifically with respect to water pollution cases. It was followed up by the court asking the municipality as to what steps the municipality should take, seeking the idea that if they are allowing those drains to flow freely, they will no longer be living there, because the impact which the deteriorated water will have on the people and the environment will lead to death and disaster occurring in these areas. So a follow-up case was also taken up as to how much progress has been done for the setting up those plants, what progress was done by the municipality to stop the flowing of this drainage, of this sewage into the drainage and then directly into the river. Similarly, near this point of time, in Delhi, where the river Yamuna flows, one of the industrial units, namely the Delhi Bottling Company Private Limited, was accused of, or they were stated that it is a likelihood that they are trying to dispose of their waste, untreated waste, into the river. The evidence of the untreated waste being thrown into the river was not found, but they found that the company lacked a treatment facility within its boundaries, so it could not be allowed to operate further till they set up treatment plants, and a little later, the Kanpur Tanneries case came up. So the court on its own and under its judicial activism has taken up several cases whereby it deals with with these matters in absolute strictness and calls for taking immediate measures to stop all polluting activities. Then comes the four interesting cases which led or which changed the course of environmental law from criminal to civil trials. This was the case of Municipal Council Ratlam versus Vardi Chand. In this case, in the 1980s and prior to that, one of the companies was disposing of, it did not have a treatment plant where it was using chemicals and where it was running its industry by letting off that untreated waste flow untreated onto the streets, onto the roads. The population in and around that industry was a large number, but they were very poor even if they were employed in the said company. As the case and the facts stated, it was a combination where rich lived a very high life and the poor were extremely poor even to afford the basic facilities. The question of cleaning the filth and the stench which came out of the working of that industry was felt, and the people went to the court to seek for redressal from such activity. The court recognized the activity as one of creating nuisance and invoked section 133 of the CRPC to remove this waste and sought the municipality to do the same in a very quick manner. The municipality, instead of taking advice of the court, went into appeal to the higher and the higher courts, where finally the highest the apex court stated that had they utilized this time in cleaning the area, they would have found much better solutions and much quicker solutions. The municipality pleaded no funds as a way of not getting that untreated waste being not cleaned up or not being removed of the filth and stench within that area. People were openly secreting, they were openly walking into these areas, and they were contracting diseases while living within this area. So on the direction of the court and under section 133 of the CRPC and under the directions of the court stating that it should be immediately removed, they offered Shram Daan as a solution for absence of funds, where people joined in to remove that filth and stench and did not allow that industry to operate till they set up a treatment plant within their facility. So this was one of the last cases where section 133 or the criminal law could be invoked for nuisance being created for environmental matters. The next case which came up was Tata Tea Limited versus State of Kerala, where the Tata company was asked to remove, where it was imputed that they are creating pollution within the state of Kerala due to their activities. But the important question was not of creation of pollution, but use of which law or which law should be applied to such situations, because with the criminal law of section 133, it renders the environmental laws inadequate, or they can no longer be invoked when criminal law is invoked for environmental purposes. In this case, the court gave out a very interesting judgment where they stated that environmental law has its own field of operation and criminal law has its own field of operation, but you cannot always invoke for public nuisance until and unless the nuisance is grave, or it is life-taking or threatening, or it may wipe out other life. You can no longer invoke criminal provisions such as section 133 of the CRPC for these matters. Environmental law is sufficient to deal with these matters. In the next case of Abdul Hamid versus Gwalior Rayon Silk Manufacturing Company Limited, the court went on to talk about how to deal with the situation where the lawyer sought the court to invoke section 133 and the court refused to do the same under the judgment which had been given out in the case of Tata Tea Limited. Finally, in the case of State of Madhya Pradesh versus Kedia Leather and Liquor Limited, the court stated that it is the environmental law which is important. It is the Water Act which is important. So if a water problem arises, the boards which have been set up by the central government or the state government, wherever it may apply to a particular area, may, through its normal procedure, ask for picking of samples from that industrial unit which is which is allegedly said to be polluting a stream or a river or a natural resource of water. Thereafter, picking the samples, they would send it to their government laboratories established for this purpose. There are also laboratory analysts who would be appointed in such places, who would prepare reports on the basis of the scientific evidence and a scientific manner, where reports would be prepared twofold, and one of the reports would then be sent to the industrialist to take note of why action should not be taken against him. The second report shall be used as evidence by the state boards to arrive at a decision. After the decisions has been taken by a board, an appeal may lie to the appellate authority of the board, where the person, whosoever may be, is aggrieved by the decision of the board. After the final decision is given out by the appellate authority, it then is now, earlier it used to be sent to the local courts, depending on their jurisdiction, whether it is territorial, whether it's pecuniary, or where the subject matter is situated. If the pecuniary jurisdiction is higher, then it would directly reach the High Court, where it would be tried. And as we are witness to the fact that there have been a series of events and series of cases which have been tried, and the judgment has come out almost after 20 to 30 years. And in certain cases, the judgments are still languishing in the courts for them to be tried, or for the judgment which may come out in a beneficial manner. The delays in our courts are also one of the reasons that beneficial environmental judgments cannot be taken out immediately. So it was the progress of the law whereby section 133 could be invoked in the previous cases in the 80s. Since the law has been drafted in 1974, it is only after this that the judgments of the courts have come out with respect to this law. This law has witnessed an interesting change of environmental passage from having common law remedies for nuisance, negligence, strict liability, and other offences, to criminal law being invoked under the CRPC, under the IPC, and under the Civil Procedure Code. So it is the Civil Procedure Code which remains in such cases. The cases of criminal liability or section 133 as stated out by Tata Tea. Another interesting fact which was given out by this case was that it is only the civil courts which will try these cases, and the procedure that shall be adopted for trial of these cases will be the CPC, which only provides for punishment or an amount of money which is so little that at the time it was drafted in the 70s and the 80s, it might have been sufficient to deal with an environmental problem. But in today's date, this amount is insufficient, and the amount of punishment prescribed, it does not serve as a deterrent to those involved in such activities. Now, looking at water resources as a main resource within the state, and as it was drafted by the Parliament of India, it went on to define pollution in terms of sewage or trade effluents, whether they are in the liquid, gaseous, or a solid substance. But when injected into the water, it would either be a nuisance or be harmful or injurious to public health and safety. This may be in a domestic form, this may be in a commercial form, this may be in an industrial form, it may be in agricultural form, or any other legitimate uses for life and for health of animals and plants and all living beings, even aquatic organisms. It also led to the establishment of the central board with certain powers and functions to be performed. It led to the establishment of state pollution control boards with members having similar qualifications as that of the central government, except that they would be selected by the state governments. Meetings would take place from time to time within these committees, and there would be a temporary association of persons of the board for particular purposes. If a vacancy fell within the board, that shall not invalidate any act or proceedings which may be carried out by the board. 2 or more states may have a joint board, and the purpose of giving decisions with respect to particular problem shall lie on the shoulder of such boards. The powers and functions of such kind of boards would be to aid and advise the central government or the state government, as the case may be, and in any matters of pollution or prevention and control of water pollution, coordinating the activities of the boards in resolving the disputes, providing technical assistance and guidance to the boards or any investigation, and research related to water solutions, planning and organizing training of persons engaged in various programs, organizing mass media and comprehensive programs for prevention and control of water pollution, and permitting such functions of the press for the boards for collecting, compiling, and publishing technical and statistical data for which relates to water pollution, laying down or modifying the links with the state government, any standards for a stream, well, or performing any other functions which may be prescribed by the Act. The law clarifies the position of any directions which may be given for performing such functions by the board, and the central government would not preclude the state government from performing its functions simply because it is performing one of the main functions. The Act provides the power to the government to restrict the application of the Act to certain specific areas. That is, if an area is dominated by water, or as a marshland, or as a pond or a well, which needs to be protected or may be having religious sentiments of the people within that area, then this solution may be brought out and they may make special provisions for specific areas if it so requires. So it may also declare certain areas to be water pollution control areas, and it may alter any water pollution prevention and control of pollution area, or it may extend or reduce, or may define new areas which require specific or special directions with respect to the same. They have the power of obtaining necessary information for the purposes of giving direction for preventing and controlling of water pollution from any industry, operation, process or treatment, and disposal of any other information regarding the construction, installation or operation of any establishment, or the disposal or extension or addition of any establishment. So this law is self-sufficient, as I would say, in itself. But if a person or an agency or any unit or any identity does not take into its account any of the provisions of the law, there are deterrent means to stop them, provided one has the will to do so. Recourse to the courts would be there as a sure remedy, but whether it comes speedily or not remains to be seen from case to case. With the enactment of the NGT and the NGT passing directions with respect to certain specific areas or certain specific places, may bring about a speedy disposal of the cases, but in certain cases, due to lack of evidence, the cases or the judgments are delayed, which is a major lacuna under the law. So I would say the act is there, it is sufficient in itself, it provides the proper ways and means of acquiring justice with respect to water, provided one has the will to do so. The drawback seen of the law is inadequate means of punishment and inadequate penalty provisions, which does not serve deterrent to the environmental offenders or defaulters. Thank you.
I am A.K. Sharma and I am Professor of Sociology at IIT Kanpur. The question I am going to address is what is urbanization? Urbanization is essentially the process of population concentration, which means that if more people start living in a smaller number of places, or if the distribution of population becomes more unequal, like more people living in places like Bombay, Calcutta, Mexico, then we say that the urbanization is taking place. Essentially, it means increase in percentage of population living in areas or localities which are defined as urban. Urbanization is a new phenomenon, of course, a post-industrial phenomenon. About 200 years ago, hardly 5% population of the world lived in urban areas, and today more than 50% population of the world is living in urban areas or localities which are classified as urban. You will be happy to know that according to 2011 census of India, in our own country for the first time, increase in the urban population has been greater than the increase in the rural population, though India is not so urban as the developed countries, and about 31% population of India only is living in urban areas. We can believe that in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years time, India will also be more urban, at least more urban than what it is. It may not be 80%, but certainly it will be 35% or 40%. Now, how is this urban locality defined? Because this definition of locality as urban or rural is crucial to measure level of urbanization. I will give you definition of our own country. In Indian census, an urban locality is defined in two ways. There are statutory towns and there are census towns. All places with municipality, municipal corporation, cantonment or notified town area committees are called urban. This is statutory definition. According to demographic definition, there are three main criteria. If a locality has more than 5,000 people, or 75% of male labor force is engaged in non-agricultural activities, or the density of population is 400 per square kilometer or 1000 per square mile, then we say that the locality may be classified as urban. There are many other additions to this definition, Now we have the concept of urban agglomeration and many other things, but essentially this is how urban population is defined in India. And as I said that urbanization is associated with economic development and industrialization, same is the case with India. About 100 years ago in India only 11% people were living in urban areas, today 31% are living in urban areas, and this is obviously linked with economic development of the country, growth of per capita income and industrialization. I remember that in one 5-year plan it was mentioned that today this urban population can grow by way of natural increase of births minus deaths in the urban areas itself or through rural to urban migration. Today nearly 60% contribution to growth of urban population is due to rural to urban migration, and this is going to increase. This is essentially what urbanization means. Urbanization means growth of population in localities defined as urban in relation to population of localities defined as rural, and I have given you Indian definition. Thank you very much.